Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are debating which Primarchs would pass the Emperor's test of the Great Crusade. I'll throw out a general spoiler warning to begin here, as I will be mentioning events from across the Horus Heresy, but I think we can waste no time and just jump straight in. Okay, so this week we've been discussing the Reboute Guilliman Alfarius feud from Omegon's perspective. And we begun the week by discussing a very interesting comment made by Omegon on this matter, in regards to the true purpose of the Great Crusade. That while, yes, it was to conquer the galaxy for mankind, the true main purpose, however, was to test the Primarchs. That it was the Emperor's way of seeing which Primarchs would be able to move on to the next stage of his grand plan. And so today, I thought it would be fun to discuss which Primarchs the Emperor would pass had the heresy never arisen, and which Primarchs he of course would have failed. Who would have moved on to his next stage within the webway, and who wouldn't. As usual, there are no right or wrong answers here, it's just a bit of fun, so drop your own thoughts in the comments below. And I think maybe we'll split this into two parts, heading through the Primarchs in Legion order. So let's begin with the first, Lion L. Johnson. For me, I don't think there's any question that L. Johnson would pass any theoretical test with the Emperor regarding his performance in the Great Crusade. The Lion was highly regarded amongst his peers for his ability, generally regarded as a rival for the War Master position, and he carved out a fearsome reputation for the First Legion. And on top of all that, the Emperor appeared to have implicit trust in him within the heresy, even over the likes of Reboute, giving us a real piece of insight into how highly the Emperor valued and trusted L. Johnson. So for me, there is no question that if the heresy didn't arise, the Lion would pass the Emperor's test by the end of the Great Crusade. L. Johnson would be at the forefront of any crusade within the webway. Now on to Fulgrim. Fulgrim for me is either a tricky one or a clear and easy answer, and I can't quite make up my mind which. Obviously, we know the Emperor rewarded him and his legion with the honour of wearing the Aquila, the Emperor's personal symbol. And we know Fulgrim performed admirably for having such a small legion, seeking to achieve perfection in honour of his father. And in that regard, Fulgrim would be an easy pass. There's no reason to suggest the Emperor was unhappy with him in any way. However, there is the fact of Fulgrim's slow corruption by wielding the demon sword he had acquired. And so the question is, would the Emperor have recognised the weapon and the taint within Fulgrim? And if so, what would he have done? He appears to have been very forgiving to fallen sons at times with what we have seen in the lore, offering redemption to the likes of Magnus and Mortarion, for example, at other times being surprisingly harsh, claiming Perturabo is lost because of his oath, even though he broke an oath to betray the Emperor himself. So it's hard to know which way the Emperor would react with Fulgrim, if indeed he noticed the weapon and the power of chaos at all. Given the Eldari and Eldrad immediately recognised the power of chaos upon sight of the sword, I'd say the Emperor would undoubtedly do the same. But if he didn't see the sword, well then it's a different matter entirely. And so we can only go with what we know, that the Emperor never saw the sword. So until the time he did, I'll go with yes. Fulgrim would pass the test of the Great Crusade. But I think with a little disclaimer in mind. It could possibly be a very different outcome for Fulgrim indeed, the moment the Emperor saw the demon sword within his possession. Now on to Perturabo. Perturabo was undeniably getting more disillusioned as the Great Crusade went on. More disgruntled and more discontent. The final campaign in the Sactrada Deeps, the last straw, inflicting devastating casualties upon his legion. In a region of space Perturabo felt was worthless, blaming the Emperor for it. And immediately after this, he returned to his rebelling world of Olympia, and he essentially massacred it, including members of his own legion who refused to take part in it. It's pretty hard to see the Emperor forgiving that, and Perturabo doesn't really have the excuse of a tortured mind like Konrad for his actions. Perhaps with Horus not being corrupted, there's the possibility he could have prevented it from happening. But that's really a bit too much of a what-if scenario, and we can only go by what we know. And so I think for all the benefits the Iron Warriors and Perturabo would bring, there is a danger his actions upon Olympia may have been a bridge too far. Again, sometimes the Emperor can be surprisingly forgiving with the Primarchs, sometimes not. He could use the end of the Great Crusade as a clean slate, an excuse to give Perturabo another chance. As I've personally felt if only Perturabo could have seen his father one more time, he would have never sided with Horus and betrayed him. That it was just his absence and his own mind that pushed him the way he went. And he never truly fell to chaos until after the heresy, because Perturabo in his core was still pure. So I don't know here. I really don't know. Maybe the Emperor would have had Perturabo face a trial similar to Nicaea. Maybe he'd simply cast judgment himself, straight away, one way or the other. But if Perturabo felt he couldn't be forgiven, and the fact he doesn't have Curze's excuse of mental issues, I'll go with his own verdict, that the Emperor would have been forced to censure his Lord of Iron. But again, that's not an easy decision, and I wouldn't be surprised if Perturabo was given a second chance, with the Emperor really not wanting to get rid of a son who had simply got a bit lost mentally and gone too far. I know that sounds crazy given Perturabo's actions upon Olympia, but we have to remember we are talking about the Emperor here. A being so far above normal humanity, it's impossible to comprehend. However, on to Jaghatai Khan. Now, Jaghatai and the Emperor had a famously bad relationship. Maybe bad being a bit strong, but they simply didn't see eye to eye. The Khan couldn't agree with the Imperial truth. And without the heresy arising, you'd assume he'd end the crusade still being firmly in this frame of mind. And so their relationship would still be strained, to say the least. However, Jaghatai's performance within the crusade should give the Emperor no particular concerns. Yes, Jaghatai was often far out on the far reaches by himself, but he got the job done. Yes, he kept himself to himself when it came to his brothers, but he didn't antagonise any of them either. And there's a possibility that in revealing that next stage of the plan, freeing humanity of the warp and the reasons why, that it might actually improve the relationship between Jaghatai and the Emperor. The only factor that really gives me any pause is remembering that the Emperor told Malcador in the Heresy to watch Jaghatai Khan closely. because he feared he could be the next to betray him. But I really think that was just down to their strained relationship, and that makes no difference in a universe where the heresy never transpired. And so I think the Khan easily passes the Crusade test, despite having a personal poor relationship. Moving on to Leman Russ, I think this is a pretty straightforward one. Russ was clearly one of the Emperor's most favoured sons. The Emperor didn't bat an eye when Malcador expressed concern of Russ's axe falling a little too readily, telling him it falls on those deserving, and then outright stating he knew that Russ was one of the few who would never fall. And I've said before, I've long felt that Leman Russ and his legion were a strong anti-chaos legion. So this one's an easy one for me. Russ would absolutely pass the test of the Great Crusade. Now, would he be used in the War for the Webway, or remain to protect the Imperium? That one's a little harder to answer. But regardless, he definitely makes the cut. On to Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian. Rogal is the only Primarch on this list who we've actually seen pass the test of the Great Crusade, being chosen by the Emperor to be his Praetorian and return to the throne world with him, to fortify the palace for the next war to come. So there's absolutely no doubt that Rogal was trusted and valued by the Emperor. Now, he'd most likely be garrisoning the throne world still and keeping the Imperium safe, not likely one of the legions to head into the Webway. But their roles aren't important. What is that the Emperor trusted him, which he undoubtedly did. Now, the next Primarch is a different kettle of fish altogether. Konrad Curze. Konrad always had a bit of an uphill battle given his torturous visions of foresight, more powerful even than that of Sanguinius, and it appeared to be something he never really quite got over. We've yet to see how the Emperor actually helped Curze in this regard during their time together, but he at least appeared to be a little more stable once found and placed in charge of his legion. However, that undoubtedly began to decline as the Great Crusade progressed. Curze fulfilled his role as required, no doubt about it, but he constantly clashed against his brothers because of his methods. And as time went on, as his legion began to degenerate from within, the brutal methods of the legion began to get out of control, and Curze's mind along with it, ultimately ending with him assaulting Rogal, nearly killing him, and then destroying his homeworld of Nostramo, which all transpired before the heresy broke out. Now, you could argue if there was no heresy, perhaps Curze's visions might not have kept happening, and the Emperor would have been able to show him the future isn't set. But then there'd be way too many rabbit holes for us to go down for today. So I think we have to say the Crusade would end with Curze in a very bad situation, called in for sanction by the Emperor as he was. I do think Konrad's a bit of a unique case, and as I've said a couple of times already, the Emperor can be hard to judge sometimes. There's a definite possibility he'd regretfully have Konrad executed, but there's equally a chance he'd see the sorrow of his tortured son and want to help him when he could, keeping Konrad probably imprisoned upon the throne world until his Webway conquest was finished. But either way, that means Konrad surely doesn't pass the Crusade test, simply too unstable by this point in time. And so Konrad is definitely for me the first Primarch the Emperor would categorically not have involved in his next stage. as dubious as I was over Fulgrim and Perturabo. However, moving on, next we have the angel Sanguinius. Another pretty straightforward one here. There's no doubt the Emperor would absolutely be happy with Sanguinius's performance. While Sanguinius being declared the favoured son in the Siege of Terror felt a little bit forced for me. I understand why it was done, to build up the impact and tragedy of his death. And regardless of whether or not he was the favoured son, there's just no question at all that the Emperor implicitly trusted him. There's a definite possibility Sanguinius could be kept within the Imperium to act as the symbol of the Emperor if the Master of Mankind entered into the webway, but I could equally see Sanguinius fighting from the front within the webway too. But as I said, Sanguinius is an easy one. But okay, I think that's it for today, reaching the halfway point through our Primarch list. Which of the Primarchs mentioned today do you think passed the test of the Great Crusade? And which of them do you think fail? Like me, do you agree Konrad surely doesn't move on to the webway conquest, given how unstable he was by then? And do you think Perturabo and Fulgrim are questionable too? How do you think the Emperor would deal with Perturabo's actions upon Olympia? And do you think he would notice Fulgrim's possessed demon sword? And if so, how would he react? And are there any other Primarchs you disagree with, that you think surprisingly the Emperor would have removed? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll continue with the rest of the Primarchs in part 2 on Monday. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.